Hey folks, Sean here, and today what I want to talk to you about is why the metaverse is largely considered to be a failed product. So it's no secret that things haven't been going well for Meta. They have been reporting loss after loss. Many of their projects and developments regarding the metaverse have been ridiculed by the media and users alike. So it's really kind of been bad news ever since they announced its launch. And from a financial perspective, it looks honestly even worse. The project has had nearly $18 billion of losses that have been incurred thus far, as well as in the past year, the stock price is down 70%. So that all looks pretty bad on paper. And the reception from folks that at least were expected to be using the metaverse is not a whole lot better. So there's a lot of detail out there in terms of what isn't going well. I've read recently a Seeking Alpha article, and in it, it explains in great detail a lot of the mistakes that have been made, and especially those on paper, but also the reception as well too. And what I'd rather do, as opposed to like diving into incredible level of detail in terms of what hasn't gone well here in the history of Facebook and them becoming Meta and all that other kind of stuff, is really simplify where I think the largest failure has occurred here. And if you somehow can get past all of the ridiculous stuff that has happened with the metaverse thus far, like, for example, the fact that for the longest time, and for some reason still even kind of today, a lot of the avatars seem to still not have legs. It's just like these floating bodies around in the metaverse, which looks awful weird. And a lot of the other poor graphics, which, even their CEO has been ridiculed about in terms of how bad the character looks, leading to a pretty weak user experience thus far, is I want to focus on the most alarming statistic for me, despite the fact that what I've shared thus far is already pretty impactful. And that's the fact that people aren't using it. That's something that is talked about, but not talked about as much as all of the other numbers that I've shared thus far, because those are so damning. If no one's using it, to me, that's highly indicative of you have a solution without a problem. And I think that's the most glaringly obvious problem Meta and the metaverse realistically has, and is exactly that. It doesn't solve a problem, at least for me, for anyone, not anyone that I can think of at least. So that's where I'm genuinely curious to get feedback from you as well too. Like, does anyone have any context for problems the metaverse actually solves? Because so far, to me, what it seems like is a novelty, and a bad one at that. And that's a bad place to be. So in the explanation of kind of the differentiation between a vitamin and a painkiller when it comes to various products, right? While user will use either one of those for a very specific reason, as in they're investing in a painkiller because it treats something very specifically, but a vitamin, on the other hand, is the science is more kind of ambiguous, as in maybe it helps, maybe it doesn't. And the retention rates when it comes to a product that falls in either one of those two categories are very different. The idea is to be a painkiller at all times, and you really don't want to find yourself in the vitamin category. Now, I understand that innovating requires having to figure out some of these unknown elements, but you can still innovate, but innovate from the context and perspective of you solving an actual problem for someone. And again, as far as I could tell thus far, that's not happening in or with the metaverse. So there's all kinds of rumors out there in terms of them, forcing people to use it that work at the company and all that other kind of stuff as well too. But the numbers are pretty bad and pretty depressing for how much has been invested in this project thus far. So not only, the novelty is worn off of the metaverse in terms of what it is, and it's going to change the world and selling real estate and all this other kind of stuff. Add to that the current climate and economic conditions. That's led to the metaverse having to make, and Meta having to make pretty dramatic changes of laying off over 10,000 people, their workforce, which is like 13% of the workforce working on this project. So that doesn't appear to be going well either. So it's pretty much all bad news for the most part. And I think one of the worst things of all of it is their CEO is essentially kind of married to this idea or concept, and largely won't hear any of the feedback in terms of what all of this data seems to suggest. And I think what that kind of pretty obviously looks like is the fact that this is largely a failed product or a failed project. So, if I were to be providing advice to them and figuring out how to right this ship, so to speak, you're really married to, you've made a pretty considerable investment here, so I understand, but you have to figure out how to leverage this product or as a solution that ultimately starts with solving a problem for someone. You're trying to create something that doesn't seem to provide any type of a solution for any form of a problem that anyone seems to have, at least that I can tell. So if you have any feedback on that, I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to reach out to me. Love to kind of get into a conversation about this in terms of, does anyone see this from different context or perspective than I do? But that's my content that I prepared for you today in terms of why I think, in rather simple terms, the metaverse is likely to fail, and it's because I think it doesn't solve a problem for anyone. Hey folks, thanks for watching my video. I hope you got value out of it. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel, which gives me a better idea which content is the most valuable, so I can create more that hopefully offers you more value. And please leave comments below as well too. In particular, what I'm curious to learn more about from you in terms of this piece of content is, what problems do you think the metaverse does or doesn't solve? And do you think it's ultimately going to be successful or unsuccessful?